is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft beer and craft chocolate. My name is David Nilsson. I'm a professional beer writer and an advanced cicerone, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or at her website, annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. It's pitch black outside in the pre-dawn hours of a cold January morning in western Indiana. Caleb Michalke of Sugar Creek Malt hands me a headlamp as we put on our shoes. I've just rolled out of bed in the Michalke's guest room at their farm, but coffee and breakfast will have to wait, because the fires in their Soinhus, a Norwegian smokehouse for drying brewing malt, need to be tended. It's a steep hill down to the Soinhus, Caleb tells me as we step out into the frigid air and navigate the farmyard, dodging a choir of chickens, barn cats, goats, and one very insistent rooster who's been crowing since 4 a.m., a nightly occurrence that has earned him the name Quattro. As we near the Soinhus built into the side of a small hill, the sweet, plummy smell of cherrywood smoke fills the frosty air. When we step inside, it's more intense and spicy. My eyes begin to burn. A Soinhus is a Norwegian smokehouse in which the malt drying bed rests directly above the wood fires. The bed is made from wood planks, in this case pine, with countless holes drilled in them by hand to allow rising smoke to permeate the drying malt. Caleb can burn different types of wood to create malts saturated with unique smoke aromas. He relights the fires under the malt bed while I rub my hands together for some fleeting warmth. When he's done, we walk back to the house as the first blush of dawn begins to tease the horizon in the east. As Caleb makes us a farm breakfast of sausage and scrambled eggs and coffee, we talk about the language of smoke and the story he's telling with that language here in the Midwest. Smoke is one of the most evocative smells in the world, awakening a primal human recognition within us. It can be alarming or reassuring, acrid or appetizing, but it's always impossible to ignore. Of course, there is no one smell that is smoke. Different organic substances will produce different smoke aromas when burned, from the sweet hickory, often used in barbecue, to the sharp smoke of cleansing sage, to the comforting tones of a fireplace on a winter day. When I was a moody teenager writing terrible love poems in my bedroom, I would burn those cheap scented incense sticks you can mix and match by the dozen at gift shops. Today, when I walk into a shop where those are being burned, I get an instant hit of emotional nostalgia for those heady, heartbroken teenage writing sessions. Because of the smoke from a 25-cent stick of shitty incense. Smoke is powerful stuff. Smoke can be found in abundance in the world of craft beer, and it's making its way into more and more bean-to-bar chocolate as well. There is a colorful world of these aromas and flavors out there, and brewers and chocolate makers are using that palette to paint beautiful culinary pictures in smoke. Once upon a time, pretty much all beer was smoky. Beer is brewed with grain, and usually that grain is barley. In order to be used in brewing, that barley has to be malted, which means a maltster subjects it to hydration and temperature conditions that cause it to germinate. During the germination process, plant hormones stimulate the release of enzymes that break down the internal structure of the grain and begin converting its complex starches into simple sugars that would normally fuel the plant's growth until it can break through the soil into sunlight. Brewers want to feed those sugars to yeast during fermentation, however, so the maltster has to halt the germination process at the right stage by drying the grain back out. Nowadays, the vast majority of malt is dried out with indirect heat. The technology for doing that has only existed in most places for about 200 years, though. Prior to that, malt would have been dried with wood fires, and the exposure to smoke would leave most beers with a smoky flavor. and a handful of historical or experimental beer styles still use artisan malt dried in this way to infuse the finished beer with the challenging but fascinating flavors of smoke. The most notable living smoke beer tradition is found in the German city of Bamberg. Here, a handful of breweries, as well as breweries recreating similar beers in the U.S., brew lagers with beechwood smoked malt, and the resulting savory smoke character can be confusing to the palate. Because meats like bacon and ham are often cured with wood smoke, these beers often remind people of those meats, which is not something we typically expect to smell or taste in our beers, though these can become quickly acquired tastes. Another living smoke beer tradition exists in Norway, where homebrewers use a soinhus, like I mentioned earlier, to infuse their rustic malt with an intense wood smoke aroma for their farmhouse ales. The tradition is hanging on by a thread, but attention from regional bloggers Lars Marius Garskjold and Mika Leitinen has raised international interest in the tradition, and Caleb Soinhus is the first and only one he and I am aware of in the Western Hemisphere. In addition to the soinhus, which we'll talk about more later on, Caleb is using other smoking techniques to infuse malts with a wide array of smoke aromas. He uses dozens of different woods, from familiar types like hickory or pecan, to more unusual fruits like mulberry or lemonwood, to exotic varieties like coffee, Jamaican pimento, or olive wood. He's used barrel staves from bourbon, rum, Tabasco sauce, and other barrels, and a wide array of herbs like lavender, tarragon, and mint. Much of what Caleb does revolves around smoke. It's a substance, a multi-sensory ensemble that clearly compels him, a lonely impulse of delight, to quote Yeats, that motivates much of Caleb's tinkering. I visited Caleb early this year for a story for Pellicle magazine in the UK and felt like I had stepped into an immersive sensory world outside normal life. We talked again on the phone recently while he was on vacation at his family's cabin in northern Wisconsin, and in between being interrupted by Caleb catching a fish in the middle of our talk, don't worry, I edited that out, we discussed what it is about smoke that compels his curiosity. Talk to me about smoke. You know, you do the sign house, you do cold smoked malts. This seems to be a particular medium that just really grabs your imagination. Why smoke?
Yeah, it's a great medium, but unfortunately, it's not like a hugely popular style of beer. So I've went down an avenue of things that, of trying to make these really unique malts that a lot of people don't really brew with. But I don't know, I wanted to do something different. We started a malt house, and I didn't want to be like every other malt house making, base malt and that's it. And so we started making base malt, and then like a year into it, I was like, I want to do something that I can be creative with. And so that's when we started the cold smoker. Once we got the cold smoke going, then we built a roaster. And so then I started doing a lot of really unique roasted malts and really fresh roasted malts. And then 2 years ago, we decided, I started, reading Lars' blog and all the things that were going on with Kvike yeast. And then I started reading the malting and brewing operations that were also going on in Scandinavia. And I've seen all these breweries trying to do really traditional old world style beers, but you can't do that with modern ingredients because the malt now doesn't taste like the malt tasted back then. And so I really wanted to open up the world to brewers and distillers too, to getting their hands on the raw ingredients, the base ingredients to make these styles of beers and whiskeys. I don't know, I was talking to somebody a couple months ago, and they, said that what I'm doing is trying to push forward by looking backwards, I guess, and I don't know, I see all these crazy trends of just dumping everything that you can into beer and making all these crazy, adjunct beers and milkshake IPAs and everything. And I wanted to kind of put my mark onto the beer industry and try to get people to, make different beers, but not, actually let's look back and make some beers that were popular before the 1700s and see what those taste like. Because everybody always thinks, oh, that beer wasn't good. It fell out of production because it wasn't good. That's not necessarily true. I mean, I've had some beers remade with wind malt and with these smoked malts that are just fabulous. I mean, they don't taste like traditional modern beers that we're having now, but the flavors and the profile that comes through in them are just totally unique and totally delicious. I mean, I love drinking them. The smoke just kind of called me, I guess, in the beginning. After we started doing the cold smoke, we have 40 or 50 different cold smoke malts that we've made in the past 5 years. After starting that, and then starting the Swinghus, it's just been a total, it's kind of been what we're known for, I guess. It's not like big volume of what I make. My main money maker is base malt and probably even roasted malts after that. But, the smoke malt is definitely something that we do that's unique, and nobody else is doing, and really kind of put our name on the map, I guess, as far as malt houses go.
So you mentioned smoked beers are not the most popular style of beer, and that's true for smoked beers in general, but with some of the specific ones that you're doing, like the Tabasco barrel or lavender or other herbs and things like that, like I don't think anybody was probably pounding down your door asking for those. It seems like there was some kind of curiosity or passion on your part that really made you want to pursue those. What goes into the experimentation with wanting to try all those unusual smokes?
Yeah, like I said, I want to open up the possibilities, I guess, for brewers. When brewers 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, wanted to make a smoked beer, they had basically two options, and I think there's so many different flavors and so many different intricacies that you can get with different woods and different herbs and things like that open up smoked beer to a wide range of audience members, I guess, and consumers. And so I wanted to, I don't know, just make a bigger palette, bigger painter's palette for the brewers to paint with, and not just leave them with one or two colors. And I think that's what my malt house is all about, is just allowing so many different flavors and so many different colors of malts and different grains and different smokes. And that's what I've kind of always strive to do, is just kind of keep pushing the boundaries as far as what we consider a certain type of flavor of malt and what we consider a certain type of flavor in the beer. And that's, when we went into doing the cold smokes, like you said, lavender and Tabasco barrel, that was kind of just kind of popped up in our heads, and, we decided let's run with it and see what the malt tastes like. And yeah, nobody, we made lavender smoked malt. That was first, one of the first really weird ones that we ever did. And we made the first batch of it, and actually 3 Floyds and 18th Street did a collaboration with it and made it. And ever since then, that's been one of our bigger cold smoke malts that we make. We actually have a distillery make a single malt whiskey with it, so a lot of it goes into there. We've had a lot of other breweries make, Avery just did one. I don't know if you saw that one. I don't know. I just, like I said, I really wanted to open up the possibilities for brewers. And that's kind of the avenue that we've gone down in the last couple of years.
Caleb is referring there to Avery Swanson, former brewmaster at the highly respected Jester King Brewery just outside Austin, Texas. Avery is one of the most highly regarded brewers of mixed fermentation beers in the country, and she recently relocated to Chicago, where she brews small batches of beer at Half Acre Brewing under her own line called Keeping Together. Each beer release is a unique vision that might never be brewed again. She brewed a beer with Caleb's lavender smoke malt called I Am Because We Are. The nature of the beer's release meant I didn't have a chance to try it, but I spoke to Avery about the beer, and she said, "The smoke character is front and center, but it has so many layers. It reminds me of a high-elevation Tobala mezcal with savory flavors of terracotta earth and faint cinnamon spice under delicate top notes of white flowers and mint." She later went on to say that more than anything, it reminds her of a mezcal margarita. Not what you might expect, starting with lavender, but smoke does funny things. I asked Caleb to explain more. With any of the herb smoked, the cold smoked stuff, does that flavor come through pretty directly into the finished malts? I mean, is there a clear lavender note, or does that change in the smoking process?
So it's not like it's definitely different than just like a lavender, because you're smoking it. So you have that burning, almost like kind of incense kind of flavor coming through. Lavender is really unique. When you first smoke it, it does have like kind of like a soapy lavender, like really kind of an floral flavor. As it ages for about 3 or 4 weeks, it turns into this beautiful, like cinnamon toast, almost oatmeal cookie kind of flavor to it on the aroma. And then once you put it in the beer, then you get So you get that kind of aroma coming from it. And then once you drink it, it has more of like a kind of like a burnt herb kind of thing, like an incense kind of thing almost. It's just a touch of it along with that lavender and oatmeal cookie kind of flavor. So it's definitely different. The lemon balm, same thing. It's got a little bit of a tartness to it. We've done lemon balm. We've done cardamom's really unique. We've smoked cardamom pods into malt. That's really spicy. So yeah, it definitely it comes through. I mean, it's not like taking that raw ingredient and just putting it into food like in culinary, because you're burning it. So it definitely it has that smoke character to it. But then the different flavors of the different herbs and different woods also come through with it too. So
on the other side of the world, in Bangkok, Thailand, a chocolate maker is using another unusual source for smoke in one of her chocolate bars. Natalie Suwanprakorn runs the bean-to-bar chocolate company Xoconat. Nat grew up in Thailand and moved to the United States when she was 11. After attending college, she started Armadillo Chocolate in Gainesville, Florida, and had success with it, but ultimately decided to move back to Bangkok to be near family and help with her family's business. She always knew chocolate would re-enter the picture, though, and now she's making chocolate bars infused with flavors from Thai cuisine. For her Up in Smoke bar, she uses a Thai aromatic candle, which is often used in making some Thai desserts. I was totally unfamiliar with this method of smoking food before I found the bar on Nat's website, so I reached out to her to find out more about the process and flavors of this tradition, as well as what it means to her to be able to use cultural touchstones like this in her chocolate.
The Thai aromatic candle is generally used for desserts. So it's a U-shaped beeswax candle, and it has a wick at either end. And the candle is made of frankincense, ylang ylang, and mace oil. So it's really heady, very fragrant. There's a blogger, her name is, her blog is She Simmers. Anyway, she described it as being quite mournful, and I thought that was a good description. It's just such a heady, rich scent. But it's used for cookies and for baked desserts, and it's like set and then covered up with whether it's in a pan or in a covered up dish or whatever. And then you can either smoke also coconut milk as well to go into desserts on top of that, because a lot of Thai desserts are actually like desserts in a coconut milk or coconut cream, and sometimes it's scented with that. So it's not used in any other savory dishes or anything like that. It's just basically desserts.
And how did you get the idea to use that with one of your bars?
I was sitting at my friend's tea house, and we were talking about flavors. She's a master tea blender, and she just does a lot of great work. And she was in the middle of scenting some teas, basically. And I just said, what are you doing? Like, I always knew that you grow up with that flavor. They're just like little white cookies. And as a kid, I would eat them all the time, but I had no idea how that aroma got in that cookie. I never put it together, never thought to ask about it either. And then when I saw her doing that, she was perfuming some black tea inside of a glass jar. Yeah, that's when the light bulb hit. And I just thought, I have to do this. And she gave me a candle, and I went back home and I tried it with some nibs, and it worked.
How do you actually infuse your cacao with that?
So it's roasted nibs, and then I just set it inside of it's like a 3-tier container. Like a steamer, basically. Here we use, it's a red steamer, and it's used for dumplings or for steaming potatoes or for any number of things. And I set the candle in the bottom, and then there's racks of nibs, and then I just rotate the nibs around, and then it's smoked over for many, many hours.
I don't know how much of a difference it would make, but is there any heat associated with that, or is it mostly just cold smoke permeating that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just cold smoke, and it does give off its own bit of heat, Mm-hmm. And also because for whatever reason, I can only find, there's various sizes of these candles. For a while, I was able to find larger ones that burned for longer periods of time. I cannot find them all of a sudden. So you're constantly relighting these tiny little candles because, as I said, I smoke for at least over a day, go through quite a few.
What cacao are you using for that bar?
Currently, I'm using Prachuap, Kirikan, and Prachuap is on the southwest coast of Thailand.
What went into selecting that origin in particular? How did that work with the smoke?
This particular cacao region, or from this farmer anyway, the bean is it's not as bright and as acidic as its cousin on the East Coast, because especially now there's many more origins that are coming into play. But when I started off with this bar, basically it was Chantaburi on the East Coast or Prachuap or Chiang Mai in the north. Anyway, its flavor profile is quite mild. You know, it's kind of nutty, it's kind of cocoa-y. There's some fruit notes, but it's nothing as piercing bright as what's on Chantaburi. So I went with that. And I decided to roast it, just roast it at a profile that didn't pull out the underlying acidic notes that are inherent to that bean, even though it's not as bright as the other one.
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, Final Gravity Issue 5 is now available in the shop on beantobarstool.com. This 5th issue of our zine telling personal, human-centered stories from the world of beer is full of great articles. Bano Segudu tells the story of the South African beer style Umkombothi, poignantly explaining its role in her culture and the importance in her family's celebrations and milestones. Maria Krugliak writes about discovering the Portuguese half-pint after moving to Portugal during the COVID-19 pandemic. Amanda Bruns and Obakeng Malope discuss the water spirit Mamuhaswa and the collaboration beer they brewed in her honor. These and numerous other stories fill the 56 pages of this zine. We've expanded it and added a few features for this issue. It's full color, full of lots of beautiful photography and art. Definitely check this out. It's on beantobarstool.com/shop. You can purchase this issue or subscribe, and you can always support us on Patreon and get extra perks as well. Cheers. So I imagine that allows the smoke character to really be the main part.
Yeah. And the smoke of this, I have to say this, it's a very specific flavor. Like the customers who love it are mostly Asian, like, because whether you're Chinese or Vietnamese or in this specific region, there's some version of this smoke candle that's used within the region, and Westerners just don't get it. It kind of just blows their palate, and they just think it tastes like a candle. Which I guess it does, but so we're so used to it being with desserts and cookies and things like that. It's also, as a chocolate, it's so surprising for the customer or for whoever to try it, because they've put it together. I don't really have to tell them what it is. I usually just like them to blind taste, especially an Asian customer, and they know exactly what that flavor is. And then, of course, the added element of surprise that it's in a chocolate bar is really nice. But I also, in the bar, the inclusion in the bar is a pandan cookie crumb. And that is done on purpose so that there's still that kind of snacky element. The textural contrast with the crumb is that the crumb is it's crunchy. It's also, because it's flavored with pandan powder, it's green. So there's also the visual contrast, which I always really like in a bar, and then some coconut crisp on top. The chocolate itself, the smoked chocolate itself, is already so overwhelming. I didn't want the inclusions to be any much more of a surprise to deal with. So the pandan is quite bland but comforting, and then the coconut crisp is just that. It just adds more texture to it.
Can you describe briefly the flavor of the pandan powder?
Pandan is very neutral generally, but like there's a kind of fresh greenness to it. The pandan, when we use it in Thai desserts anyway, because pandan is as long, basically like greens, grass stalks, like tall grass stalks, and we will blend it with some water or what they call a lime solution as well, and then use it to, it's more of a scent. There's never a hard flavor to it. But I also wanted to use it as the pandan crumb because, as I said, Thai desserts are also in a kind of a cold coconut soup. And there's one Singaporean dessert called lot chong, or that Thai is called lot chong, and it's these green tapioca slivers scented with pandan inside of this coconut ice milk, and the coconut ice milk is also scented with the candle. So I wanted to pull those flavors in together. So that's kind of an homage to the lot chong as well.
You mentioned that a lot of Westerners think that it tastes kind of like a candle. Is there an aspect to it that is recognizably smoky, even though it's, different from what smoke they might be expecting, or does it not really carry a smoky element to it?
Oh, it's definitely smoky. Yeah. It's definitely very smoky, but it's just a totally different kind of smoke. I mean, I would say whether it's smoke like from apple wood or, like what you would use to barbecue. I mean, you get that there's a residual kind of note of something else, right? Mm-hmm. But then there's the smoke element. For sure you get that.
I imagine then that the process of smoking those nibs is quite a sensory rich experience for you. I imagine the whole place kind of smells like it. Talk to me a little bit about what that is like the day that you're doing that.
Basically, it's just, I have to keep an eye on it. It's just relighting the candle, and I'm checking in on it about every 20 to 40 minutes. And I since I have to keep an eye on it constantly, I don't have it at the shop. I smoke it at my house. And my neighbor, so I have a neighbor who she's quite up there in age, and she'll say she really loves the smell because it's quite nostalgic for her as well. Because also this candle that we use it quite often, actually the younger generation have really started moving towards more Western style of foods, unfortunately. And so they're not so into that kind of flavor, but anyway, it's just nice. She said, I really love that smell. What is it?
You mentioned that you were familiar with the flavor from the cookies that you would have when you were younger. From people who are familiar with this flavor, what is the reaction? Is it nostalgia? Is it excitement? Is it, how do they respond to tasting that in a chocolate?
Well, first, because I usually, if I'm there with them and I will just say, just taste it, there's a quiet, contemplative moment, and then there's the big aha, and I really love the brightness on their face because they say, because it's called kanom gliep lam duan is what the little cookies are called, these little white cookies, and they'll be usually able to pinpoint it right away. And then there's nostalgia because as kids everyone had them, and then there's just like surprise and real appreciation that's in a chocolate.
With the candle and with several of your other bars, you're using a lot of flavors and ingredients familiar within Thai cuisine. What goes into that for you? What are some other examples that you've been able to do besides the Up and Smoke bar?
Yeah, I do like to use a lot of the regional flavors because obviously we have amazing food here. Our food culture is great, but the crossover between our food culture and chocolate had been and still remains quite narrow because our perceptions of what chocolate should be is still very confined to Western standards. So I wanted to break out of that box, and I started with my confectionery products with caramels that were infused with fresh Thai herbs, So that's my Siam Sap, the Siam Sap Badass bar. And that, when I started making that bar, that was the end of 2016. And I thought it was a great bar. I really didn't think it was anything particularly unique, because I was just transferring very traditional flavors into chocolate, but people were very surprised. I mean, just chili and chocolate was already kind of a thing here. That's how kind of slow the culture here is to catch up with chocolate and flavor. And so when they realized that there was also lemongrass and fresh kaffir, they were just like, I was just shocked how shocked they were that, oh my gosh, this is like a tom yum in a chocolate. I said, yeah, that's the inspiration. And they're like, weird. Most recently I did one, it's called Monsoon Season, and it's a 3-layer candy bar. It's a layer of pandan nougat, and then a layer of shop-made almond marzipan, and then a layer of durian ganache. Then it's wrapped in a dark chocolate. And I was really happy with that candy bar, because I'm like a confectionery fan. I like chocolate bars, okay, but I really love chocolate confectionery, like nostalgic chocolate confectionery.
Yeah, that sounds indulgent.
It is. It's fun.
Well, one thing I like to ask, and I'll ask this specifically about the Up in Smoke bar, what story is that bar telling?
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, my book on pairing craft beer and craft chocolate is available now on Amazon and on the Bean to Barstool shop. Pairing Beer and Chocolate, a guide to bringing the flavors of craft beer and craft chocolate together, is out now. This paperback book explains the process of pairing beer and chocolate, includes a guide to hosting a pairing at home, walks through dozens of beer styles to provide style-by-style pairing guidance, and gives room for taking your own pairing notes along the way. This is the only book on pairing beer and chocolate available. Grab your copy now at the link in the show notes or on Amazon. If you manage a tap room, bookstore, chocolate shop, or cafe and want to stock the book, get in touch about our easy wholesale process. Beer and chocolate belong together, and this book is your guide to getting the most out of every pairing.
I think it's telling a story of transition in a way, because it is a classic traditional method of that we've used for many generations in dessert, but the transition of moving moving into Western ideals, or being very influenced by Western ideals, the way that the commodity market has really changed in terms of what kind of foods we eat, how we think about the foods that we eat, the speed at which we eat these certain kind of foods and everything. The transition story of moving into that, but I think it's so interesting that while we're an origin country and it's something that we've had for so long, chocolate is still a very new thing. So it falls within a realm of newness and of kind of Western ideology, like the Western ideas of chocolate. It's still a major hurdle to say that, Belgium chocolate is not, there's no Belgium chocolate. That doesn't also define like quality. But then when you tie in together the resonance of a very ancient practice of dessert making and pull it in with chocolate, which is considered as new, there's a real cultural identifier then in that bar. It allows the person to think how our own culture can be infused in something that we consider to be a Western other, that in fact it has been and always will be a part of Thai culture, cacao, actually. It's been underneath our noses the whole time and we didn't know how to process it. And now we kind of can take ownership of it, which I think is a really wonderful thing.
Because Nat only sells her chocolate in Thailand, unfortunately my first taste of this intriguing bar will have to wait. Around the world, though, other chocolate makers are introducing the flavor of smoke to their bars. In London, Rococo Chocolate uses Lapsang Souchong tea, a smoked black tea, in their big smoke bar. In Utah, the Cacao Bean Project was experimenting with cacao smoked over various woods, though the bars aren't currently available. Numerous makers are adding smoked salt to chocolate bars, including La Folie and Chocolat Latour. In Norway, Fiak Chocolade makes a bar with oak smoked malt. This is the second time Norway has come up in this episode, and if you couldn't tell from the spelling of my last name, I have Norwegian heritage. Long polar or subpolar winters in Norway lead to fire and smoke being a big part of life in this Scandinavian country. And while I've never been to Norway, I hope to visit in the next few years, the smell of wood smoke on a winter day awakens something in my heart, like a song I recognize but can't remember where I first heard it. Naturally, I was deeply intrigued by Caleb Soinhus at Sugar Creek Malt. How unlikely was it to find a piece of Norwegian brewing tradition in western Indiana? As we tended the fires under the malt bed through the afternoon during my visit and took a hair-raising ATV ride across a muddy field to retrieve more cherry wood Caleb would split for the next batch, I couldn't help but feel surprised and delighted by the experiences my career as a beer writer has afforded me, the doors it's opened, and the windows it's allowed me to peer through. Caleb and I continued our conversation recently about this tradition, and as we talked, I drank a beer made from malts from the Soinhus. Fontaflora Soinhus, made by Fontaflora Brewery near Asheville, North Carolina, is unlike any smoked beer I've ever tasted. It isn't savory or stale. It's like the entire life of a wood fire was distilled into a glass. Ash, coal, dry smoke and cold air, warm wood, the comforting smell of the fire on your favorite flannel shirt. I felt like I was back inside the Soinhus back in January, the dim light rendered foggy by the smoke and glinting off the antique Victorian glass rosette door handles leading to the smoke chamber, which were rescued from Caleb's grandmother's property. You can hear the passion and dedication as Caleb talks about everything that has gone into this project and the joy of tasting and smelling what has come out of it. While we're talking, I'm actually tasting Fontaflora's Soinhus with your...
You have it? I haven't had that yet. They were going to send me a case. I never got one.
I had a friend who just came back from Asheville and brought me a couple cans. It's awesome. Do you remember which wood you used on the malt that they got?
Yeah, so that was a traditional, all the Rauch malt, all the German beechwood smoked malt. So they did a traditional Rauch beer with that. So double decocted, step mashed. I think it was pretty high on the malt or the smoked malt percentage. I can't remember the exact number, but I want to say it was like 70 or 80% smoked malt, and then a little bit of pills, I think, or something like that. So
yeah, it's pretty smoky. It's
yeah.
It's funny because so often with smoked beers, we learn to associate smoke with other flavors, and this really just smells directly like actual wood smoke. Like I feel like I'm back in the Soinhus from the day that I was there, and just like smelling directly the wood fire.
Yeah, it's so crazy. I mean, the smoke character that comes out of that Soinhus is totally unique. Like when I taste a beer that has that malt in it, I can definitely tell it's from our place. And I think it's just I think it is just the process there, and just how we're doing it and doing it in the traditional manner and stuff. So I've had beers from probably a dozen different breweries that have made smoked beers with this malt, and they all they all taste differently, but they all have that same character. They all have that, like you said, like a real somebody. I was just with Iswas Brewing like a couple weekends ago, and he said this is like smoke with a meaning. He's like, a lot of times you taste smoked beer and it's like, oh, they just smoked it just for just to get the smoke flavor. He's like, this is like smoke with like there's a reason behind doing this. It's not just to have smoked beer.
I feel like a lot of times with smoked beer, and I don't mean this from a quality standpoint, but they almost could have added like liquid smoke. Like it's just a smoke.
Right.
It's just in there to be part of the flavor.
Right.
This, I feel like it instantly makes me feel like I'm by the actual wood fire. Like there's a sense of the fire itself.
Right. Yeah. That's totally the difference on the malt that's coming out of that building. It's totally unique, and it's totally in your face. Like just round fire. It's not like you said liquid smoke. It's like it's a round, robust, different flavors, and you can and different levels of different things in it. It's really unique. It's really fun. We wanted to start this and didn't know what was going to come out of it. I've been cold smoking for a few years before that, and knew the flavors of that. But then this is just a whole different level. It's amazing. I love the malts that come out of it.
What was the moment at which you realized you wanted to do that? That's quite an unusual undertaking.
I remember the day that I decided, what, fuck it, we're going to do it. I'm sorry. Can I say that?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. Yeah. I was driving home. I made a delivery to a brewery, and I was driving home, and I had been talking about it with one of my employees he was really into the Nordic brewing stuff. He had kind of introduced me to Lars' blog, and I started reading that, and I was like, you know what, someday I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna have a malt house and maybe do some brewing like that and everything. And we had an old building that had been basically sitting empty. It was fallen in. It was just the foundation of an old barn. It was a 2-story dairy barn. The upper level had fallen in, so it was just the old concrete foundation. We'd had that on the property since we bought it and since we started the malt house, and it was just an eyesore. And I was driving home one day, and after making a delivery, I thought, why am I waiting? Let's just do it. So that night I went and talked to my wife and my parents, who are all owners of the malt house, and I said, I think we can build this for a very low price. We're not going to put a whole lot of overhead into it, and it'll make some of the most unique malts in the world. And I think even if we don't make money on it, which we really don't make a whole lot of money on the sign house, it's kind of my little side project, but it definitely has brought us a lot of attention and helped our business grow in the long run. So yeah, I don't know. I just kind of got a bug and decided, let's just make it. Let's do it and make something unique. So
you had the opportunity to go to Norway to see kind of the birth of that style of malt house and see how it's done there. What was that experience like? Like, how did that feed into coming back and actually producing those malts on your own property?
Yeah, it was really amazing. We went over there last October for the Raw Ale Festival in Hornindal. So we went there first and then spent the rest of the week up in Stjørdal and the island of Tatra, which is where the majority of they're not considered craft malt houses over there. They're basically home maltsters. They don't sell it they're not commercial maltsters. They just malt for themselves and then brew their own beer. So we spent a week up there and visited probably a half a dozen malt houses up there, and spent 2 nights actually running one of the signs, which is their oven, their grain dryer, the wood fired drying. I mean, it was like it was like a story or a movie, I guess. It was just so beautiful the entire time, so picturesque, and the people were so welcoming and taught me, how they run theirs and the dimensions of theirs and, how they built it. And, I never felt like I was bugging them or anything like that. They were always very, very open. So it was a really beautiful week, I guess. I look back on that a lot in the last year and really think how lucky we were to be able to do that. So then bringing that back home really allowed me to learn, because I don't have any temperature probes, or I don't have a computer program, running the fires or anything like that. It's all by sensory. It's all by putting my hand in the grain and feeling the temperature. It's all by smelling the grain as it's going through the drying process, and being able to be around somebody that's been doing that from generation to generation and then learn from, their ancestors. Being able to spend a couple of days or a week with them and learning and running an actual batch with them really, allowed me to not ruin a lot of batches right off the bat. Cause that's what I would have done, is I would have just been, all right, let's do it. And then I would have burnt a bunch of batches or not done them well enough. And that first batch that fall was right on. It was dark. It was about 30 Lovabond. And we kind of dialed back a little bit after that. I figured out, how to run the fires after that to kind of get it around 10 to 15 Lovabond, so it's not as dark. But that 30 Lovabond was beautiful too. Like, it made a really cool beer. So I always tell brewers that I'm working with on these malts is that it's consistently inconsistent. So, you can never know, it's not going to be the same every time, because just like with mixed fermentation, you never know what you're really going to get, because we're drying it completely over the wood fire. There's no fans, no dampers, nothing like that. I just open up windows and allow the wind to come in to kind of push the moisture out. And I'm running the fires throughout the night and things like that. So it's floor malted. So it's, in floor malting, you get a little bit different modification levels in the grain. So you have a wide range of modification in that. I mean, it's, it's all modified enough that, it'll produce, great beer, but some is a little bit more modified, some a little less modified. And then throughout the drying process, the bottom of the grain, since there's no fans pushing that heat up through, the bottom of the grain gets a little bit darker than the top of the bed of the grain. And so there's this whole range of toasting. There's a whole range of melanoidin production. There's just a whole range of things. So it's like 1,000 different malts mixed into one malt. And it produces just such a beautiful bouquet of colors and aromas and everything. So
yeah, I can verify that tasting this beer right now. I feel like every sip I'm getting something different from this. With the Somerville itself, you mentioned you got the wood from the barn on your property. You're using the antique doors from your grandmother's cabin. You didn't have to do that, but you kind of intentionally put some of your own story into that building. What went into that?
Yeah, it's kind of who I am, I guess. I'm very sentimental with my history and the history of my family, I guess. And since I wasn't technically going back to the farm, that my grandpa started for us in our county, I wanted to still have a portion of, what he built for us in that. And then with the doors from the cabin, it kind of really fit for me because when I'm up, actually, that's where I am right now. And during doing this interview, I'm up at that cabin up in the north woods of Wisconsin. We're about 20 minutes from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. But I've always felt like this is kind of like a little Scandinavia up here. I really feel like it's a totally different world when I come up here. And I spent a lot of my summers, as a child and growing up here on this lake. And we were able to get some of the old doors that when we replaced new doors in there, so we got some of the old doors on that. And so it's kind of like a blend of both sides. So my dad's side is the farming. My mom's side is one that was from up in Chicago and northern Wisconsin. And so it's a bit of a blend of both of my family history, the farming side with the grain and the malting, and then the Nordic side, I guess, with this northern Wisconsin, that side of my childhood and my upbringing. It kind of, I don't know. I think the malt house, the sewing house is a culmination of both styles of my upbringing. I guess I felt like when I was at home in Indiana, I was working, I was on the farm. It was a very different style of life. When I'm up here, it feels much more laid back and free and able to experiment with things. And so I kind of took both of those and made one business out of it, I guess. So.
One of the things that struck me the day that I spent there on the farm, and I put this into the article that I wrote for Pellicle, is how many different sensory experiences there are during your average day, even when you're not even talking about tasting a finished beer. I mean, just the process of what you're doing, you're getting all these different smells. And talk to me a little bit about what that experience is like for you and how that kind of drives what you're doing, that even when you're doing hard physical work every day, there's still all these sort of indulgent sensory experiences that are part of that.
Yeah, it's sensory overload, honestly. Like it's everywhere you go on the property, you're smelling something different. And it's not just there. As we talked about earlier, it's smell and sensory with a purpose. When I walk into a room and I smell a certain smell, I know that process is going well. If I smell something different, then I know something is going wrong. We are very low tech at our malt house. As you saw while you were there, a lot of, our roaster we have some temperature dial, homebrew temperature dials in it, and that's it. Our kiln that makes our base malt is the only thing that we use a computer program for. But even turning grain, we go in there with pitchforks and turn the grain in our modern malt house, our main malt house. We're turning the grain and we're smelling it and we're feeling it during the germination process. As we empty it out of the steep tank, we're shoveling it with shovels, and we can smell the grain coming out. Which, as it's coming into the steep tank, it has this beautiful like banana nut, kind of sweet melon flavor to it. As it's germinating, it has this really nice fresh cut cucumber smell to it. And then you throw it into the kiln, and you have all these toasted nuts and breads and things like that. Then you walk out to the roaster, and you have just caramel and sweetness coming from crystal malts. Or if we're making roasted malts, then you have really deep, rich chocolate, cocoa flavors. And then you go to the sign house, and you have all these other aromas. I mean, yeah, it's totally sensory overload, but it's how I work, I guess, and how I create things. I know what that smell should be, and I know if something's off, then we need to check it. And that's kind of how I've always worked with that. At the end of the day, when I go into the house, my wife can always tell what I've been making that day, because I'm just drenched in that flavor and that aroma. So,
with that in mind, what is it like then tasting a finished beer that uses one of your malts? I mean, you've coaxed it along the entire way. What is it like getting that final sensory experience?
it's really amazing being able to pull out the flavor. You know, a lot of people, when they taste beer, they're like, oh yeah, I think, that's the hops, or, that's this style of malt that's in there. But to be able to know that flavor directly, during the process of making it, and then to have a beer with that in there, it's a totally different, I can drink beer that I don't know what the grain is, and I don't know what the ingredients going in there, and it tastes great. I love the beer, but I can't pick out different flavors. But to know the process from start to finish, and then to have that beer in the end and be able to pull out those flavors and link that back to, the time that we made this specific malt, is just an amazing experience to be able to then share that with people.
Since talking with Caleb, I've had the chance to taste another beer made with his Soinhus malt. Lock 27 Brewing in Dayton, Ohio, near where I live, recently brewed Stjordalsøl, a Norwegian farmhouse ale using Stjordal malt from Sugar Creek. Rather than the beechwood used in the beer from Fontaflora, this malt was smoked over alderwood, and the differences showcase how unique each wood smoke can be. Where the Fontaflora beer had an intense but clean fireside smoke quality, the Lock 27 beer was funkier, with a sweeter impression to the smoke up front, along with some sharp, almost medicinal phenolics that softened into fruity and lightly meaty flavors that eventually dry out to an ashy, smoky char. It's a lot, but I loved it. In Somerville, Massachusetts, on the west side of Boston, Eric Parks of Somerville Chocolate further illustrates the uniqueness of different wood smokes with an applewood smoked chocolate bar. I reached out to him to ask him about the process and ingredients for this unique creation.
I have a love of smoked foods, just going back forever. And that was actually one of my first ventures in chocolate. After I was able to get a halfway decent bar, I thought, this is great, let's get smoking this thing. And so I have one of those big green eggs, tried everything. I tried roasting in an old cast iron wood stove, and I've been messing around with that. That recipe has been pretty much set for a number of years, where it's fun to roast cacao over fire and get the flavor that way. It's just really hard to manage the quality control, because cacao generally wants a more precise roast temperature. I think there's a guy in Utah who might be doing something where he actually roasts his cacao over fire, like mesquite and things like that. I have not tried his stuff. So that is something I've been pursuing carefully. I've tried different woods, pecan and Pacific alder. The apple I just love because it's New England and all that. And it has a little bit, to me, a little more punch than some of the others. Pecan I was also successful with, but I was a little nervous about the allergens. I wasn't sure if it's officially an allergen at that state or not. It is a nutwood. And what I do with that is I smoke the nibs. So I roast it first, break it into nibs, and then I take it outside and smoke it. It's a very delicate process, though, because you can easily make it too much, like a Duraflame log kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So it's a really gentle smoke. And so I kind of back it up and blend it with a certain amount of unsmoked chocolate at the end too, to kind of bring it back some. Because it's also a little polarizing. People generally love it. Some people are just repulsed by the idea. So it's, I always tell people you can love it or you can hate it, and you're in good company either way. Part of the fun is trying that kind of stuff.
Is the flavor profile on that one sort of just broadly wood smoke, or do you get a particular character from the applewood?
There is a character from the applewood. It's tough for me to come up with a flavor descriptor because it's so personal. So to back up on that, I've paired that with a Dominican cacao that already has a fairly fruity edge to it. And like the Dominican cacaos in general are a little bit more bright and fruity and robust that way. And the applewood I chose because it's smoother, it's sweeter in feel. It doesn't have any of the acridness of mesquite or even oak. Some of those can get a little bit too edgy for some. So it's sort of like a team, kind of like Wood Smoke 101 kind of thing like that. I have tried others, and I would say that you don't get as much of the difference in flavor in the chocolate as you would in something else, like a rack of ribs where it's been just nuked for 5 hours in the smoke. It's really more about what's not there than what is there with the applewood, I think.
This applewood smoked bar is a fascinating flavor journey with gently funky and fall-like wood smoke aromas and notes of roasted and slightly overripe orchard fruit that dovetail beautifully with the subtle berry undertones of the Dominican cacao. Definitely check this bar out if you have the chance. Eric actually produces his chocolate in a brewery, and we'll hear more from him about this partnership in another episode soon. The smell of smoke seeps deep into our brains and teases out ancestral memories from a time when fire played a bigger role in our daily lives as a species. Most of us don't use it as often now, but we haven't lost our sensory connection to these emotionally potent aromas. I grew up obsessed with the comic Calvin and Hobbes by Bill Watterson and still read back through it often. There's one particular strip in which the titular characters are walking in the snow. Calvin, a young boy, says, someone's having a fire. I love the smell of a fire on a cold winter day. Isn't it strange how smells are so evocative but we can't describe them? Hobbes, a tiger, says, I don't know, that fire has a snorky, brambish smell. It's a little brunky, but the low humidity affects that. To this day, whenever I smell wood smoke in the autumn or winter, I think of those invented words and smile, and they made it into a handful of tasting notes in my notebook over the years. Seek out some beers or chocolates with smoked ingredients. Even if you think you know smoke, you'll be surprised how those aromas in a new sensory context can tug at the corners of your brain and allow you to rediscover smoke in all its snorky, brambish, brunky glory. You can learn more about my guests and their businesses, Caleb Michalke of Sugar Creek Malt, Natalie Suwanprakorn of Xoconat, and Eric Parks of Somerville Chocolate in the show notes. The music for this episode was performed by my friend Anna P.S. You can find out more about her in the show notes or at her website, annapsmusic.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bean to Barstool.